Welcome back, everybody. Today, I'm happy to be joined once more by my friend and colleague, Dr. Ezequiel Bistoletti, from the wonderful Spanish language YouTube channel, Demoliendo Mitos de la Política, or, in English, Demolishing Political Myths. Ezequiel, welcome back.
Hi, Pascal. Nice to be here again.
Ezequiel, you're Argentinian. You are looking at world affairs also with a South American kind of prism. And the United States, the Yankees just invaded Venezuela. They just killed 80 Venezuelans and Cubans and others who were there and guarding the president, and then kidnapped the president. Being from the region, how do you look at that? I mean, what went through your mind when you heard that news?
Well, somehow I expected something similar to what happened, but let me tell you that I am Argentinian, of course, but I wrote my thesis about Venezuela and Chavism, so I lived for that in Venezuela. I carried out my field research there, so I'm kind of familiar with the situation. I think, Pascal, in order to understand what happened, we have to start with a bigger picture, which is the terminal crisis of the unipolar order, an accelerated decline of the United States, political struggles within the US, and in this context, the emergence of Trump, and from then on, four big changes in the foreign US policy. That is a retreat in Europe, as everybody knows, a shift to China, an attempt to retreat in the Middle East that is naturally impossible because of Israel, and this is the important part for America, a toughening in the American continent, which does not only include the Latin American part of the American continent, but also Canada and eventually Greenland as well. So in that context, we have this attempt to reestablish a new kind of Monroe Doctrine, this Monroe Doctrine, as they call it now. And we have naturally the attempt to seize all the resources, the natural resources of the region, but not only that, that's a big part of it, but not the only dimension of it. You also have an attempt with this intervention in Venezuela, but with many other indirect interventions that are taking place in Argentina, in Chile, in Colombia, wherever you go in Latin America. And even I could say that with regards to Canada as well, you have a struggle to somehow take out China of the picture. And China is, with a huge margin, the main trade partner of practically all countries in Latin America, the only exception being Mexico, naturally. Nevertheless, its presence, it's growing there. So we have this attempt of a 3.0 Doctrine Monroe. We have the search for the natural resources, but we also have this confrontation in the American continent with China, and naturally, we have also there an attempt to somehow give a message to all the regional powers who might try to attempt a kind of sovereign foreign policy. And I'm talking here basically about Mexico, but above all, this is a message to Brazil, right? And in this context, the US starts something that I call now blatant imperialism. The US has always been imperialistic, in particular with regards to Latin America, but now this is a blatant type of imperialism. They don't only do all the stuff they have always done, but they now say, okay, we are going to run Venezuela. That's the words that
and that's new, Trump right? That's new. They always try to hide it. They try to put a velvet glove over, like humanitarian glove over the iron fist of the United States, and they stop trying that. It's like now just no.
This patina of justifications that you had in the past about democracy, capitalism, the liberal freedom, and so on, this simply disappears. You could say naturally that they are using narco-terrorism and drug trafficking, but even when they say that, 5 minutes later, they are saying openly it's actually about the oil and we are going to run the things there. We have on the same day that this happened, we have also statements of Trump, Marco Rubio, and all the higher staff of the U.S. presidency about Greenland. We need Greenland. We are going to take Greenland. And we have also naturally claims that there's going to be a new round of attacks against Iran. So this is what I call this blatant imperialism, right? We could also mention that since Trump came to power, I think he has already carried out 6 or 7 attacks. There's several. There's Somalia, there's Nigeria, there's Syria, Yemen, now Venezuela, and it will continue like this. So this is a general situation, and in this context, at least in my channel, me and many other analysts, we were expecting something like this in Venezuela. We knew there was not going to be open invasion. This is something that the US American elite has learned from Iraq, from Afghanistan. Going in with boots on the ground sooner or later becomes a disaster. So what they do now is they just attack and put pressure and try to run things as Trump said it. At the same time, Pascal, what I see is a completely chaotic and anarchic imperialism. So there is a total lack of strategic planification. They say one day one thing, they say on the next day they say exactly the opposite. And in the case of Venezuela, I think they just went for it, hoping that this attack would suddenly bring about the fall of the Bolivarian regime. This is actually what they had predicted in their war simulations, according to the US media, and this did not happen. The vice president took power, as it should be. The military remains loyal to the regime, and the streets are completely calm. In fact, the demonstrations that we have seen within Venezuela, they were demonstrations of support of the Bolivarian government. So we have this blatant imperialism, but we have a lot of mistakes and anarchy. And this is the situation they are now. They need now to negotiate with Venezuela, and this is the situation they have.
But do you have a idea of what actually went down? Because there is still the puzzlement is like, okay, why go in and take out only Mr. Maduro? Does the US have a deal? Did they have a backdoor deal with Delcy Rodriguez that, okay, we'll take him out, you become president, and then you do as we say, and we even tell everybody that that's what's gonna go down, and you just, you comply, or we will do even worse things to you. And she's basically on board, and it's basically a internal power struggle that Maduro as well lost. Is that what happened, or is she a chauvinista, and actually, her words are truthful, and the United States, just as you said, didn't realize that it's not just Maduro but an entire system? I mean, which interpretation do you lean to?
There are 3 main possible interpretations, 3 possible hypotheses. The first one is that there was an agreement, right? Let's take down Maduro and somebody else comes up. That's the first one. Then there is the interpretation of possible treason, that someone committed treason, and this is why this happened so easily. It was surprising to see these helicopters flying around Caracas without anyone shooting, at least with a man-pad. You need one man just to shoot over your shoulder, a man-pad against an helicopter. We didn't even see that. And then there is the third interpretation. This is the one that I follow so far, and this is that they carried out this successful military intervention, hoping that everything then follows this collapse of the government, and from then on they would have the control over oil, over Venezuelan oil, but this did not happen. So the third interpretation would be miscalculation. Nevertheless, regardless of what interpretation is right about this, and among these three, the final result is the same. Even though they say that they're running things and they will have all the Venezuelan oil control, now they necessarily need to negotiate with Venezuela. They are in a position in which they forcefully have to negotiate with Venezuela, and Venezuela naturally has also to negotiate with the US. But actually, the position of Venezuela has always been open to negotiation. It was the US, the one who didn't want to negotiate with Venezuela. And talking about this strategic mistakes, these miscalculations, if you look at the oil trade of Venezuela until 2013, 2014, more or less when Chavez died, the vast majority of Venezuelan oil was sold to the US. This had been historically so. Venezuela even had a refinery, its own refinery named Citgo in the US, working there and refining Venezuelan oil, which is a very specific type of oil with a lot of sulfur, and it's the opposite of light. It's very heavy oil, that's the word. So this is how things were going, even with Chavez, until he died. Chavez had a very nationalistic rhetoric, a very anti-imperialistic rhetoric, but he always kept selling the oil to the United States. And since 2014, I think this was with Obama, but there were several waves of increasing sanctions. Because of this hostile policy towards Venezuela, the US-American oil industries started to retreat from Venezuela and could not trade anymore as they used to do in the past, or at least not in the same amount. So who is Venezuela nowadays selling its oil to? It's China, 80%, right? So you see here, Pascal, what I'm trying to say when I'm talking about this continuous erratic imperialistic interventions that try to, for instance, in this case, get control of the oil, but they actually bring about the opposite result. And I don't want to remember that or we should actually remember that this is something similar to what happened in Iraq in 2003. It's the Chinese who are exploiting now the oil in Iraq. So there is, again, this blatant imperialism, but there is a lot of chaos. There is a lot of unsystematic decision making. There is a lot of lack of strategic thinking. And now what we will have is a negotiation in which both parts will have to sit and will have to decide what they do with the oil in the current situation.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why some people interpret that the main reason for the United States to invade Venezuela is not to get its hands on the oil, but to stop Venezuela from selling oil in currency other than US dollars, to basically replace the Saudi petrodollar with a Venezuelan petrodollar and stabilize the currency, the international currency, rather than getting the actual oil. Do you put any kind of thought into such arguments?
I think that again, this all is happening in the bigger context of the confrontation between the US and China, in this change from the old unipolar world order to the new multipolar world order. So it is also naturally about the presence of China in the region. When Trump started to impose tariffs on basically every country. In the cases of Latin America, the agreements that were finally reached were, okay, we basically stop this new tariffs, we suspend that, but you have to stop trading with China. This is what they imposed on Mexico. Something similar was said to Argentina. They tried to do that with Brazil, but they could not.
Yeah.
They could not. Brazil said, okay, so we will, if you put this tariffs on us, and the case of Brazil was particularly funny because there was no type of economic justification. They just said, no, this is because you have, the courts in Brazil have condemned Bolsonaro, so, who is a friend of Trump. But Brazil was able to say, okay, we don't trade with you anymore. We trade with China, with India, with Russia, with the BRICS, and with the rest of the world. So they have to retreat, just as the U.S. had to retreat, just as the U.S. had retreated with China, with India, and with all the countries that had somehow the shoulders to support its own sovereignty. And the question of the dollar also plays naturally a role. All this trading that is taking place between the BRICS countries and let's say the global south, because there are several countries that do not officially belong to the BRICS, but they're coming closer and closer. Well, it's taking place more and more in different currencies, in national currencies. And the US knows that its world hegemony on a large scale, it's based on the use of the dollar. So this also plays a role. I don't think that these things are somehow contradicting, but they're all part of the same scheme.
So what does this do to Latin America now? I mean, Trump, I think they even outrightly said this is our hemisphere. Does Latin America actually will they go along, say like, yeah, sure, we are your hemisphere, United States of America, the way that that you said, like, America only belongs to you because you are America. This is gonna go down with like butter, and now everybody is so scared that they're gonna lick Donald Trump's boots, or what? From what you're reading and so on, what's the reaction now in the region?
Well, I think the world has, including Latin America, has reacted to this based on the two poles that are emerging again in the context of this big picture, the struggle between the US and China and the BRICS. So just as you see that Europe had a pathetic reaction to this and did not even mention the name of the US, or did not even care to remember the state sovereignty, territorial integrity, and all the things that they're all the time saying with regards to Ukraine. They did not even mention that in this case. They aligned with the US. Well, Russia and China aligned against this. And Latin America, if you look at the picture, is exactly now divided in two. You have half of Latin America that reacted against this, and this includes Mexico and Brazil. Who are the arguably with Argentina. These are the three middle powers in Latin America. You have Colombia repudiating this as well. And on the other side of the Latin American part of the continent, you have Argentina with Milei, who basically does everything that Trump orders him to do. And you have cast in Chile, this new president. He has, I think he has not assumed power as in so far, but he will align with the US as well. So this is a struggle that it's taking place there, and somehow this has always been taking place, a struggle between the hard hegemony of the US in the continent and those forces, those political forces that fight against it. But probably the new dimension of this is the direct intervention that we see even in countries in which the US is not intervening militarily, like in Venezuela. I can tell you the example of Argentina, what happened a few months ago. We had the midterm elections, and Milei was going to lose those elections. It was very clear the economy was about to collapse once again, and Trump blatantly intervened in the electoral process, saying that he would save Argentina with a bailout. And if he didn't do so, the Argentina would have to declare again the default, and it would be a chaos. So this scared people, and people finally 50% of the citizens in an election in which only 60% of the entire people participated. So in the end, it's only 30% of the citizenry in Argentina, but still people voted finally for Milei. They changed their mind over the last week and voted for him. This is a kind of intervention as well that you didn't have in the past, at least not so openly. So this is what's going on now, and this is an open struggle within the Latin American countries. But I don't need to mention that historically, well, no one likes to have boots on your own country.
And no, that's not true. The Europeans love it. They love the occupation. They do. They praise it. They honor it. They pay tribute to it. There are those who do. So how about that?
That's a good point you're making. I rectify. I correct myself. But neither in Mexico nor in Brazil, in Argentina, this is not the case either. There is a long history of anti-imperialistic movements, and I'm not talking only about little leftist groups or anything like that, but this is somehow embedded in the big political parties and the big political movements. There's also no military bases in these countries, and there will not be, because even those who would support the U.S. close policy in these countries, they would not allow that. They would consider this a breach of sovereignty. So this is a struggle that is ongoing. The new thing is this blatant intervention of the U.S. But again, you have to remember the history of anti-imperialistic sentiment in Latin America as well.
So what, switching back again to Venezuela, one of the fears is that this might cause a civil uprising and actually civil war if power in Venezuela fractures into different groups. Do you think such fears are warranted, or is the Rodriguez presidency going to be able to kind of keep everything together?
So far, I am not seeing that at all. This does not mean that Delcy Rodriguez will have an easy time, but I don't think that the big problem for Delcy Rodriguez now is the possible civil uprisings. You have to remember that most people who were against the government has already left Venezuela. So they control the military. They have a lot of supporters. That has to be said. I think that a regime that distributes 4 million rifles among the population is not a regime that it's hated by its people, because otherwise those weapons would be used against it. So that's not something that I see coming. But I could be wrong. I don't see civil uprisings in the near future, but I do see a difficult situation with regards to this quarantine, as they call it now, of the oil exportation, because Venezuela is tremendously dependent on the exportation of oil. This is something that I could only understand it when I was there. And if you go to the supermarket and you want to buy butter, you will not find Venezuelan butter. You will buy either French butter or butter from Uruguay, for instance. So what they produce is oil. They get money. In the past, this was dollars, and then they buy everything they need. So if you cut the oil, then you have an economic problem. And this is the big effect. This is the reason why the sanctions were terrible for Venezuela. And after they started in 2014, actually they started before, but they were much bigger, much profound since then. Over the years before, during the period before that, with what Chavez had done was basically nationalize oil, even though in Venezuela oil was never officially privatized, but PDVSA, the public oil company, was in the hands of managers who did not respond to the government, but responded actually to the US American multinational oil companies. So what Chavez was able to do was gaining back, taking over PDVSA and changing the margins that the oil was somehow producing. In the past, it was something like 20% for Venezuela and 80% for the multinational oil companies, and he inverted this, right? It was 80% from Venezuela now and 20% for the oil companies. And it's funny it's somehow funny to see that after this move by Chavez, not even one company, neither US American nor Brazilian. The Brazilians were also there with Petrobras. Repsol, Spanish company, oil company, was also there. None of them left the country because with that 20%, they made excellent, amazing profits anyway. But Chavez started to use this money and redistribute it, and until 2013, inequality dropped, poverty dropped, the economy grew. So the situation was way better than it was in the past until, well, he died, and then the sanctions started. And the oil exports, the oil production and the exportation, the exports decreased from 3 million barrels of oil a day to 500,000. And that was disastrous for Venezuela. And after that, with Delcy Rodriguez as energy minister, they managed to slowly start recovering this with the help of the Chinese, with Chinese investment. They didn't even have money after the sanctions to buy the necessary parts that they needed for the oil extraction. This is how bad the sanctions were. And now, right now, they are producing around 1 million barrels of oil a day, and it's growing. And the economy has been recovering. If you see, since 2021, 2022, they have very, very high growth rates after this huge loss that they had when the sanctions started. And now they have this situation going back to present, where they cannot export oil anymore because they're seizing. Yesterday, there were the 2 tankers seized again. So I think that's the main card that Trump has to play now, right? That they will have very, very strong economic problems very soon. So they will be negotiating under pressure for sure. But again, the US is also forcefully negotiating because they say, yeah, we control Venezuela, but they do not control Venezuela, and they do not want to invade Venezuela, and they could chaotize and destroy it, but then they would destroy the oil production. So they also need forcibly to negotiate. And this is the situation we are now. And this shows again the lack of planification, the lack of strategic thinking that the Trump government has. There is apparently no plan. They just react. They think, okay, Marco Rubio says, Mr. Trump, we have to invade. Okay, let's invade. And then what do we do? They don't even know what to do.
So is it a bit like the thing against Iran? Okay, go in, send these airplanes, blow up a nuclear site, declare victory, go back, but actually you lost sight of 400 kilograms of kilograms, I think, not tons, but 400 kilograms of nuclear, highly fissile material. And here you take out Maduro because you made him into this boogeyman and you declare victory, but in fact you barely save face. And then you try to continue with the bullying strategy, but it's is that your interpretation?
That's what I'm seeing now, Pascal. I know that the mainstream media is showing this in a different way everywhere. They showing a very strong U.S., America, they are very strong president. But what I see is the U.S. destroying the world order that the U.S. created after the Second World War. So this is actually this is an order that actually is in favor of the U.S. and they are destroying it. And with regards to Trump, what I see is someone who comes across as a very strong man, but actually he has a lot of internal contradictions, and the MAGA base is against this. This is something that could also be discussed because the voters, the so-called Latino voters in Florida, which is a very important swing state for the elections, they are in favor for this. But the main MAGA base is against this intervention, not because they like Venezuela or they're against imperialism. They just are against it because they think that the U.S. interventions have been very bad for the U.S., and they're right about this. So what I see is chaos. I see contradictions. I see a big giant just falling down and throwing punches everywhere. And this is a very a dangerous situation, naturally.
How do you think the relationship between not only Venezuela and China, but Latin America and China is going to develop from here on? And a follow-up question, why is it impossible? I mean, Venezuela has no pipelines that lead to the south to export oil through other outlets. Is it really just the coast?
There were plans when Chavez was in power and Lula and Kirchner over 10, 15 years. There was this plan of a pipeline throughout the entire South America, but this was never constructed, and that would cost a huge amount of money. The only way that Venezuela exports its oil, it's through tankers. But with regards to China, this is a lost battle for the U.S. Regardless of how much they intervene militarily or non-militarily, China will always win, just as it is winning in the world economy. And the only reason why it's winning, it's because China offers a much, way better deal than the one that the U.S. offers. China goes to your country, being Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, or any African country, and they say, okay, we are going to trade with you, we are going to invest, we are going to make money. They don't do charity, not at all, but they do win-win deals. They invest, and we are going to profit from that investment. We are going to get natural resources. Probably you are going to buy our products as well, but we do construct something there, we build something there, we invest there, we develop the economy. So it's a win-win situation. And the relation that the US has always had with Latin America, it's basically pure exploitation. When, if not in extreme cases, military interventions. But I can talk for hours about the Argentinian case. What you have is the US trying not, it's trying that the Latin American economies do not develop industrially, and they use the debt mechanism, basically foreign debt, just as a way to stop the development of the countries. And who would doubt for a second about what is the better option? Either this relation with the US that hinders and tries to do everything so that you cannot industrially develop your economy and puts a boot on your head, head with the debt, or have a win-win deal with China. This is the two models that are in struggle here, and the Chinese model will always win.
But it seems that the United States is making a different bet, right? They're saying like, no, we can regime change presidents either through influence campaigns or military interventions. Then they will be forced to stop economic interactions with China. We can chase China out by just scaring Latin America enough. And it works with, I mean, Milei, I think Milei comes quite a couple of things.
But Pascal Milei, it's the best example of that not working. When he came to power, Milei is number one fan of the U.S. and well, he's basically an occupier government in Argentina. And when he came to power, he said, we are going to stop all relations with China. And he immediately realized once he was in power that if he stopped all the commercial, economic, and financial ties to China, the economy would collapse. He would have to declare the end of the debt payments, actually. So what did he do? He had to retract himself and say, he even said, I'm surprised now that I will travel to China, that the Chinese economy is working so well among capitalistic premises. He's a big defender of wild capitalism. So he could not make the Chinese retract from Argentina, because otherwise the economy and his government would collapse. And that's what would happen in any other Latin American country. You can try to strong arm the Chinese in Latin America. This is what the US is doing. It's not the smartest move, and they will lose. They should try to negotiate, but who am I to say this in the eyes of Trump, right?
Yeah, but now in the process, he's like also tearing down the entire fabric of the international system, the very system the U.S. has built itself. I just had a talk with Ambassador Sandor Kushai from Hungary, and he said like, look, this is a watershed. Like in 40 years, we haven't had a moment when the U.S. even now is withdrawing from over 66 international organizations, 31 of them inside the UN. It's a frontal attack at the system itself that keeps not only world trade flowing. I mean, the attack on the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is quite old, but now everything else, including the diplomatic norms and institutions. So, I mean, I interpret this as a bit of, Rome, and Rome is burning and Nero is still singing. But it will destroy whatever the US had used to rely on in order to project power.
I see just the way you do, Pascal. The worst thing about this is how dangerous the situation is.
Yes.
Because in this context of Rome falling, there could be a nuclear war anytime. There's not that potential in Latin America, even though the actual situation is naturally forcing countries to rearm. And let's do not forget that Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina, they all have nuclear technology, and they have decided on their own not to develop it militarily, but they eventually could. But let's putting Latin America aside. In any other country in which the US is intervening, there is always the possibility of an escalation, and that escalation could become nuclear. I think the fall of Iran is one of them. It could be Ukraine. It could be Taiwan. But it's too many fronts open with too many chances, too many probabilities of, too much probabilities of a nuclear escalation. This is an extremely dangerous situation. And if you look every time I talk about my prospective analysis for 2026, I remember that I was saying it last year that 2025 would be worse than 2024, and 2024 worse than 2023, and now it's worse than 2025. So it's a continuous escalation, and this is very, very dangerous, as you know.
Yes, this is why I'm getting like very desperate, because I always thought there would be a way out, there would that at least when it comes to superpower confrontation, the new administration would be more level-headed, and they started off that way, saying like, okay, we need to get to an arrangement, we need to have a deal, right, among with Beijing and Moscow and so on. But by now it seems that all of that is kind of out, and even attacks on Vladimir Putin's private residence are kind of on the cards. The further militarization of Taiwan with a huge military deal to Taiwan is possible. Japan kind of did what Japan did on its own. That was just dumb. I put that a little bit aside and separate. I don't think that was US orchestrated. That was indigenous stupidity. But I mean, now Latin America and the US kind of saying like, you belong to us or else, it just seems like to be a very poor strategy and so insanely dangerous. And I wish there was some silver lining. Can you throw me a silver lining? Let me put it this way.
First, let me remind you of the seizure of this Russian tanker yesterday. And it is reported that Russia had sent a submarine. It's not really clear if that happened, but that's another possibility of escalation. Hopes. I think what Latin American governments have to do now is, as I always recommend, it's unite, because united we are stronger. We will never be as strong as the US is, but if we are united, everything will become more difficult for the US if they try to intervene in our countries. And then we have to basically create alliances with the emerging powers without completely breaking the relation with the US. To the US, the message has to be clear. If you want to have friendly relations with us, and nobody in Latin America hates the US or anything like that, we just demand to be respected, to be treated with respect. That's all. If you want to have good relations with us, let's go ahead. Let's have those good relations. But at the same time, we have to create alliances, bigger alliances with China and Russia. And we have to unite and become stronger through unity. And by the way, talking about China and Russia, this incident yesterday, this is creating a lot of turmoil within Russia, within China, of people saying, it's over with moderation. The US has to be stopped with this blatant imperialism. I don't know if that would be the wisest move. I honestly don't know what to do, because if China and Russia react now, probably they would escalate situation. But at the same time, it's also true that if they do not do so, their moderation is interpreted as weakness by the Trump government. So this is the dangerous situation we were talking about, right?
I still had some hope that China would just cut off the rare earths and seriously impede the United States in its, war-making capacity, because that's a very, very weak spot. But apparently the US found a way to convince China to not do so. Sorry, but very last point maybe. On Twitter, I read a lot of messages from supposedly Venezuelans who say that the ones who celebrate the fall of Maduro, and who say that if you haven't suffered from the regime, then shut up, you have no right to speak, because he was a terrible dictator, and we're just like with Saddam Hussein, right? We're glad he's gone, and everybody is celebrating in the streets. From your own experiences with Venezuela, what would you say, like, roughly how many percent of the Venezuelans inside and outside the country were against this Chavinista regime, and how many are kind of backing it up, and where's and the middle, just roughly?
It's very difficult to say, but the Chavez government even now has a lot of support. You have to remember as well that when people say, oh, we want freedom, well, we want democracy, you have to remember that, well, it's difficult to talk about freedom and democracy when a country is being attacked, just like Venezuela is, not now militarily, naturally as well, but in the past, the sanctioning and the hostile policy of the US has been tremendous. A part of the opposition also tried to have insurrectionary ways, so this created an escalation in which both opposition and government both escalated and became harder, and so this is the context. 50, I don't know, it's very hard to say a percentage. A lot of people support the government, a lot of people repudiate it, but what I'm trying to say is that the context that this government has to deal with is not a normal context. And if you look at the situation of Venezuela during the Chavez years, that is from 1999 until 2013, actually, and this is why a lot of people still support the government, they had improved their living conditions, especially poor people, but also middle classes as well, dramatically. So this is somehow, every time there is kind of an alternative model of development or anything that resembles some economic sovereignty or anything like that, it has to be destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is the experience of Venezuela. I'm not saying that the Maduro government did not commit crimes or anything like that. I'm not denying that. No, the opposition also did terrible things, killing people, and as well. What we see is this escalation of violence. It was stopped over the last years as Venezuela could start growing again, but in talking about how many people support it and how many people do not, it's very difficult, Pascal. It's extremely difficult.
Okay, no, fair enough, fair enough. It's not possible to give precise even numbers on something like this. I mean, this would need huge census and research, but this was very helpful. Ezequiel, people who want to read and hear more from you, they should first and foremost go to your YouTube channel, I suppose. If they speak Spanish, then Demoliendo Mitos de la Política. If they speak English, you also have an English language channel, right?
Yeah, we are trying to upload everything we do in Spanish, dubbed with artificial intelligence. We have a little delay of a few days, but we are struggling to do so. So, Demoliendo Mitos for those who speak Spanish and Demolishing Myths for those who speak English. They can follow me there.
Go and find Dr. Ezequiel Bistoletti. Ezequiel, thank you very much for your time today.
A pleasure as always.